year was 1748, and a lone ship sailed through the North Atlantic. And on the deck, swaggering across the wooden planks, was the most foul-mouthed Englishman anyone on this ship had ever met, with a history of being tied up, imprisoned, and disciplined constantly for his bad behavior. The crew hated this guy. He was cursing constantly and creatively, censured at least twice by his captain for coming up with new swear words with which to belittle the captain, the officers, his crewmates, and the God that they worshipped. Because for him, these idiots are wasting their time, and they are not as smart as he is. He has got it all figured out. His way is the right way. And this arrogant man swaggers across the deck, miles from the shores of Ireland, blissfully unacknowledging the mission of this ship that will eventually be to carry human cargo from the shores of Africa to the New World. When he looks to the west and sees a dark cloud appear on the horizon, swiftly bearing down on the ship called the Greyhound, this behemoth approaches, brought on by the wind and the raging squall that turns into the biggest storm that this man or any man on the ship has ever seen. The ship tosses and creaks. John, the arrogant Englishman, screams as one of his cabin mates is washed away. The men take to tying themselves to each other and to the mast to survive. All was water and darkness and the rushing of the wind and the waves. If there is a hell, thought John, it's not full of flame and fire, but water and wind, and we are in it. And in this moment, John lets go of his need to be right, to criticize, to belittle, to swear, and he cries out for mercy. What happens next is a conversion story, but it's not immediate. So it begins as a story about what can happen when our expectations and our assuredness about the story that we tell ourselves about how the world is, how they can get the better of us. It's a story about failure. It's a story about letting go. It's a story about embracing change. And it's a story about experiencing grace above all else. Within 8 years, this foul-mouthed slave trader, John Newton, would begin his journey to become an Anglican priest. And he eventually writes a poem about that night and about his journey, about the feeling that he got from crying out on the boat in the storm, that eventually extols the incredible feeling of acceptance and love for one even such as he. He titles the poem, Amazing Grace. Being in 4th grade and forgetting to tell the people that we're going to read the prayer that's on page 81 is not the only time that I have failed, but it is one that is memorable. It's not the only time that I felt embarrassed, that I felt like the world had changed, it would never go back to the way it was. Another time was when I was working at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., a maximum security psychiatric intensive ward. I was the chaplain there. I was one of the few white faces in the entire building. Most of the individuals in care are African American. Most of the staff is African American in the southeast part of Washington, D.C. I felt like I was the super chaplain, like I knew what to do, like I could come in and save people. And I did not put enough attention or intention into my relationships with my colleagues, with the individuals in care. There was still a wall between us. I was trying to control our interactions. I was not trying to be vulnerable with anyone. And about 3/4 of the way through the year, I hit that wall and felt like a failure. Felt like I could do nothing right, like there was nothing that could be done. There was no way to salvage this situation. I felt unworthy of being there. I felt unloved. I felt that my failure was final and fatal. I didn't know if I had let them down or if the institution around me had let me down. But I needed the serenity prayer at that point in my life. But back to this guy on the boat, John Newton. He has this moment where he accepts the fact that he is accepted. He learns that he is loved, he says, that this recipient of amazing grace for a wretch such as me, And yet I'm bothered by this story because this hymn is one that is personally meaningful to me. It is a song that, I kid you not, I sang to myself in the shower that night in 4th grade after being told that I was loved. But I'm bothered by this story because crying out for mercy in the middle of the sea when it looks like things are really coming to the end, that's a very human act. I get that. I think we would all do that. But the problem is that for this man, John Newton, to have this conversion, he continues to deal in human captives for 8 years before finally entering the study to be a priest. So you read the words of Amazing Grace, and his remorse is palpable, but I'm not sure how accountable he is held in that intervening space. I'm not sure how the institution of which he is a part is held accountable. His personhood, right, his humanity is deserving of this amazing grace, unquestionably. But his behaviors, I believe that's something else. He's part of an institution that demonizes and dehumanizes, and nothing comes of it for him. He's remembered as the author of one of the most famous hymns of all time. And I have to wonder that in that moment, in the storm, with the water and the wind, if he's not doing a little bit of performing. I was sitting in a meeting for Power Interfaith last week. We were talking about the good works and the goals of this organization. What changes do we want to see in the world? And two of the changes that were lifted up that really resonated with me were to reclaim what really religious people look and sound like. That it does not have to be just those on the far conservative end. That we are really religious people too. And that's why we're out there trying to make progressive change in the world. The second one was that for folks who look like me, and folks who are trying to be progressive, to be anti-racist, spend a little bit less time on performing for others. I was definitely doing that at St. Elizabeth's, trying to prove that I was a super chaplain, that I knew about anti-racism, that I could walk through the world as a white person fully aware of my privilege. And when I was called on it, when I was held accountable for it, held accountable for the distance that I was putting between myself and others, acting as if I was better than, leaning into that white supremacy culture we talked about, right? Trying to perform my wokeness. I think about John Newton, and I think about crying out with everyone around, and I wonder if this is a performance that looks a little bit like self-flagellation, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Now I see. I can't help but wonder if he's asking for attention in seeking forgiveness. Because I wrestle with this. I wrestle with this in multicultural institutions like St. Elizabeth's, like here. Other places I've been, on my road to try and be an anti-racist, I still sometimes feel the need, like John Newton, to cry out in the middle of the discomfort that comes with these spaces. I still sometimes feel the need to try to perform, to prove that I've got my liberal bona fides, that I'm a good ally, right? Because like we read, our culture kind of reinforces this idea of perfectionism, that we're not supposed to show vulnerability, that we're supposed to get it right, that the quickest and the most efficient thing is to go from point A to point B and let everyone know that you made it. That's the goal, the American dream. And that for us to win, to be the best, to get there the quickest, others have to lose. Robin DiAngelo talks about this as a symptom of white fragility, that the need to get to the destination and let others see me get to the destination, to be woke, is the goal of white liberals. In response to this, there's an article on Slate by Lauren Jackson, a woman of color, who diagnoses Robin DiAngelo's work, how it has shifted the conversation amongst liberals, especially white progressive liberals, that it includes now this newest vocabulary, and it has done some really positive things. And the impetus to simply cry out on the sea for mercy remains as palpable as ever. Because like me in 4th grade and like me at St. Elizabeth's, when folks experience pushback especially in multiracial situations, especially regarding to race. When they experience pushback, it comes along with inner turmoil. You might feel it here, or I feel it in the back of my neck. That it physically manifests, even when you are a good liberal. Lauren Michelle Jackson writes, folks can begin to focus on whiteness and whiteness only, reading the books and decrying the sins of their fathers, mothers, selves, and crying out for mercy, not only to God, but to people of color around them, asking for mercy, for absolution. Save me, help me. We might cry out to our ministers, to other authors, to educators. Aisha Hauser is the religious educator at the Bellevue, Washington UU congregation. And she recently said on the View podcast, talking about beloved community and a multiracial lens, said that the hope of Unitarian Universalism is not for us to get out of the discomfort as quickly as possible, not to be challenged and try to get from point A to point B and prove that we have made it, that we are woke, that we are at the destination. Because like John Newton, we don't always take full responsibility or accountability for ourselves as part of a larger system, part of a white supremacy hierarchy that privileges some over the others, that privileges one way over the others. There's the right way, and then there's, we don't do that here. That's not Unitarian Universalist. We can focus on ourselves to the detriment of focusing on others. To remind ourselves that, I mean well, and I got to get out of this discomfort as quick as I can. I can't handle this change. Things need to change back, go back to the way they were, which we also call the status quo. We, especially those of us who are white, don't like to be challenged, don't like to have our comfort rocked. Aisha says that the goal of congregational life, especially Unitarian Universalism, ought to be not to get out of the discomfort as quickly as possible, but to be in the discomfort together, to wade in the water together. Lauren Jackson makes the point that whiteness studies are oftentimes divorced from multiculturalism, that the conversation we have about whiteness and white supremacy culture is important and it has shifted the conversation. But if it becomes only internally focused and does not allow for connection with others, I wonder if it is performance. If we only focus on being wretched and finding redemption, I wonder if we miss out on what it is to be human, to really connect with the others around us. But McKinley, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a racist. I'm not like them, like that party, like him. We cry out. I have cried out that I have high expectations for myself because I believe myself to be a liberal, because I believe myself to be on this path, and nothing can break through that self-image of me, because to be like that would be to fail. And failure is fatal and final. I can't be in failure. I got to get out of this and get from point A to point B, get to where that grace is, because it's not here in the discomfort. I need to be seen for the good liberal that I am. The Buddhist reading that Tim read today speaks about what to expect when you're expecting and when those expectations are not met. Friends, we are inevitably going to fail. We are not going to live up to expectations because they are often impossible. The expectations we have for this congregation, the expectations we have for our world, those promoted in our principles and ideals, they are lofty, they are worthy to be pursued, and we will inevitably fail. In the language of my Christian tradition, we're all sinners. In more common language, ain't nobody perfect. Accepting that we are not perfect and that we will screw it up is actually kind of liberating in this Buddhist understanding. As she writes, that detachment from perfectionism, letting go of that sense of failure about ourself and our personhood, actually opens us up to live more fully into the now, to live in the moment, to value connection, to not blame others, to not blame ourselves, and simply to live through the discomfort. And the key point is this, she writes, that living through it without getting caught up in the fragility of our personhood, to simply live through it, allows us to let go of our expectations and change our behaviors. We need to be gentle with ourselves as persons, offer ourselves grace as persons, because we are fragile and sacred. We are light and shadow, good and complex. As the Power anti-racism teacher spoke to us, you need to accept the fact that you're good people and you got bad information growing up. And we need to know that we can behave badly, especially when 2 or 3 are gathered together. That learning to let go of this need to perform for others, of the need to look perfect, to let go of those expectations, especially about ourselves, is admirable, sacred work. It allows us to do amazing things. But I think it is important to hold expectations of ourselves and expectations about us as an institution in check. Tim said there's a difference. He said this to me. There's a difference between loving people and loving institutions. I think we have to demand expectations of institutions and learn to love the people within them. And that includes loving ourselves. So we have expectations of our church, of our people, of our country. When we first got here, when you first got to this community, if this is your first day, you might be feeling this. Everything is new and exciting. Yes, this is the best. When you first got me, your new minister, everything was new and exciting. We were on the first date. We're still probably kind of on our first date, maybe our second date phase at this point. And the first date is great. Everything is intoxicating, it's exciting, it's exhilarating. It's also fleeting. Things change. We change. We age, we droop, we die. Congregations change, institutions change, the federal government changes. Things will not always be as they are. Things will not always be as they are. We won't always do joys and sorrows the same way. We won't always sing your favorite hymn. We won't always do prayers, do sermons. We won't always have a quiet sanctuary where there are no screaming babies, God willing. Because things change. I believe we have to learn to deal with that change as a community, wading into the water together, being in the discomfort together. If we say we value social justice, if we value multiculturalism, if we value anti-racism, it means being in the discomfort together. So I'm calling for us to learn these lessons, to lean on grace and learn to expect change, and to accept change. We're not changing everything, but small things will change. Such is life. So be gentle with yourself. Learn to recognize when you are reacting and behaving badly in regards to change. Learn to hold yourself accountable, to hold me accountable, because you are loved. Learn to be gentle with yourself because of grace. I will do my best to be accountable, to hold you accountable, to feel loved, and to give out love. Because my theology is informed by 2 absolute principles that were reinforced to me that day in 4th grade and at St. Elizabeth's Hospital when I was called out for my behavior and called in. Someone taught me, you are deeply loved, and you are worthy of being loved. So act like it. Treat others as if they are the face of God, because they are. Treat others as if they are your sibling, because they are. Treat others as if you're connected to them, not by spirit, but by flesh and blood on this green earth we share together, because we are. Treat others with respect, because community is not just about you. And when we fail to live up to those expectations, as we will, as I will, embrace failure as a teacher. Learn to apologize. That's my new expectation. It's an expectation and it's an exciting opportunity. An opportunity to do amazing things, to bring our full selves here, as the welcome said. Our full selves, Our meditation doing, God language using, faded shoe wearing, tea sipping, Prius driving, granola eating, jazz listening, Jesus praising, yoga trying, black, white, brown, queer, straight, cis, trans, secular, humanist, atheist, agnostic, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, seeker selves to this table. We sang the song, "Come, come, whoever you are, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again, come." May we change our behavior because change is constant. We cannot survive together if we don't act like we know that to be true. You are welcome here. You are loved. You are worthy of love. Act like it. The prayer that I would like to end with, and that I would like us to meditate on, the ways in which we have let church down, the ways in which church has let us down. When we don't always get it right, who might we need to apologize to? How might we be better versions of ourselves? I invite you to sit in a moment of silence once I read a modified serenity prayer. Light of life, grant me the serenity to accept all the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one person I can change, and the wisdom to know that it is me. May it be so. Amen.